Great, and we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, all the way from London in the UK, Richard Atherton. Richard, you are a partner at First Human. It's a company that's creating human-centered businesses that make a huge difference in the world. And we're going to dive into that. And also, you're the first lean change management facilitator in the UK and probably the most active one in the UK. So we're going to get into lean change management as well. But let's start with, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
Okay, Lizette. Well, I know some of you are going to be listening in the audio. I'm going to take a risk here and see if I can show you a little bit with my camera. Okay, yeah. So bear with me. Okay, so my virtual office. Here we go. So for people who are just listening, I'm just showing Lizette and the viewers. So there's a tree.
Lovely.
And a
bookshelf.
And then I've got this kind of crazy yoga type platform that my dad built for me so that I can see. I'm post-chair, Lizette, as much as possible.
Love it.
Chairs kill. So I try and squat while I work, and I've got a mat there, and then I sit and I have my plants. I look out over the square in London. There's a private garden just attached to our square, which I can look out on,
That is a beautiful office.
Thank you, Lizette.
How long have you been anti-chair?
Well, I hung out in LA for a while, and if there's going to be a post-chair movement anywhere, of course it would be LA. And really got into this yoga teacher there who was just massively about just squat everywhere. And she's got this whole squatting Facebook page where she's squatting at bus stops and train stations and squat while you work. And yeah, the idea is that it's not good for our health to be sitting in chairs all the time, and it compresses our backs, and that's one of the reasons there's so much back pain in the West. But because there's very little back pain in squatting societies.
Interesting.
Because you're putting your lower back into torsion when you stretch out during a squat, rather than compression when you're sitting down. So hence my motivation to be. I'm not completely post. I've slipped. I am sitting some of the time. I was a purist squatter at one point, but yeah, I do definitely sit in chairs a lot less than I used to. And right now I'm standing. So when I do podcasts or any interviews like this, I try as much as possible to stand.
Interesting. I love it. I have an electric sit-stand desk and find myself, in the beginning I was standing all the time, and then slowly over time I've been sitting more and more and more. So yeah, but I mean, as remote workers or as any knowledge worker sitting behind a laptop, I mean, that is actually an issue, is sitting all the time. I mean, the weight problem is coming not only from eating too much, but also from sitting too much and not moving enough. So I can imagine that has a real effect on the body.
Yeah, exactly. And for all that meetings are the bane of corporate life, I do think at least it gets you out of your chair and you have to move to an office somewhere and go sit down somewhere else. So yeah, I do find you're right that if you're working from home, it's kind of easier just to sit all day long and not really get up much.
Yeah, it's very comfortable here in my home office, I got to say. Very comfortable. Okay, so let's talk about lean change, because I want to dive into, we'll talk about lean change more broadly, and then I'd like to dive into it in the remote aspect in terms of your experience with lean change management in the remote world. But I know a lot of the audience will know this already, but let's describe lean change for those who don't. What is lean change management?
Okay, so the two parts of it, there's the lean part of it and the change management part of it. So if we start with lean, so lean in the sense that we use it within lean change management has two connotations. So the first is lean manufacturing, which started with the Toyota production system, which was a way of empowering originally. I mean, it's multifaceted, but one of the big aspects of the Toyota production system and lean management in that respect was empowering the workers on the production line to make changes. So those who are affected by the work initiate and make the changes themselves. So that's one of the sort of guiding philosophies of lean change management is that particular aspect of lean. The second connotation for lean is the sort of the new incarnation of the lean idea in terms of lean startup. So for people who've come across the Eric Ries and the lean startup movement, and that's about this idea that we visualize the whole, which is an original lean concept, and we create canvases to describe what it is we're taking on. So the idea of a canvas, which is central to Lean Startup, you create your business plan on a page and you model out your entire business on a single canvas. We use that idea really heavily in Lean change management. So the idea that you can plot your change initiative on a single canvas, you can plot a individual experiment, which we can get into on a canvas, and people collaborate around that canvas. So it's a lightweight means of documenting and iterating ideas.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So I was just, I'm just starting, because this idea of visualizing work keeps coming up over and over again. It's in Jim Benson's Personal Kanban. He's talking about visualizing work. My coach who helps me, my business coach, is always saying, you got to visualize your time. You know, like, what are you spending your time on? Make it visual. It's not just a list, but like actually whatever you need, a picture or whatever. So is that what we were trying to get at here with the lean change? You want to visualize for the people, so you have one picture you're looking at.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it clear to everybody involved. It's much easier to collaborate around a picture or a canvas, even a canvas of words. But if it's one central image, it's a great way to see the interconnectedness of the ideas and to create a single view, like to unify people and align people around a particular vision or a particular way forward. And I like Jeff Bezos is very anti-PowerPoint. Like you can't present a PowerPoint to him. And another guy who we both might be familiar with, Dave Snowden, has written about instances where there's been a strong critique of using PowerPoint. And I think one of the reasons for that is that although it is a visual tool, but the way that it atomizes content into specific sides. So it's like point A, point B, point C, and when you break apart the ideas and then focus on them in isolation, which PowerPoint lends itself to, you risk seeing the bigger picture and the nuance and the interconnectedness. So that's why this idea of a canvas is so important.
I see. So because with PowerPoint, you're going step by step through each thing, but with a canvas, you've got the whole picture and you can see the details. So it's both the bigger picture perspective and brilliant.
Yeah, and it invites people to tell stories around it and share reflections on it and perspectives, but within the context of the whole, as opposed to one detail. Yeah, because
no, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think PowerPoint sometimes can also lend itself to this distraction of getting into debates on one particular point, right? And so you're back and forth on this slide and people arguing over, the particular side, and they lose the bigger picture. Whereas that happens less when you're working with a canvas, because you can immediately point to how it might connect to somewhere else. So it lends itself to discussing the bigger picture.
Brilliant. So how do companies do change now? I mean, if you're not doing lean change management, what are you doing around in a company?
Well, you're doing a lot of things as we would view it within lean change management, right? In the sense that we honor a lot of what already exists within change management and a lot of the disciplines and the practices that exist. We just seek to cut out what we see as being a lot of the waste from that process and have people move more efficiently into action. But in terms of the way that people can do it right now is that they often treat it as a big project to be planned, right? So they and the way that they often approach it is to the typical, maybe interview all of the people who might be involved, all of the stakeholders. A central change team might do this. They do lots of analysis about the problem, and then they work out all the activities that needs to happen in order to reach some end state. They then create a plan to broadcast their message in terms of where we need to get to and why we need to get there, and start moving ahead on a plan. And what we say in lean change management is when you're working in complex space, that's a naive approach, because no amount of analysis and planning can account for the inherent unpredictability of human beings in a change process. So we work with that with that uncertainty and that unpredictability is inherent when you're seeking to change organizations.
So I'm thinking like the old Gantt charts that I used to have to do when I was working at the engineering firm. Like we'd have like a year-long Gantt chart. And of course, it totally never turned out the way you planned it. So, and you're like, yeah, of course, it never turns out the way you plan it. So instead of a Gantt chart, then you're working off a canvas and you're moving from that canvas and iterating. Is that?
Yeah, you're iterating, and so there's a couple of ideas that are central. One is this idea that change is a social movement or a virus. You could think of it. So you're seeking to find the fire starters in your organization or the first movers in your organization where something's already taking off, and you're seeking to amplify that experiment. Where it's having beneficial effects, and of course where something is where you've got an experiment which is taking off but is having effects counter to what you're seeking to achieve, then you might be looking for ways to dampen down that experiment. But the whole idea is you're working with a movement, and sometimes it might be you as change agent actually testing to kick something off. So maybe you're the first follower and supporting something that's already happening, or you might be the lone nut, as we describe it, who actually attempts to ignite something in the organization as an experiment. And if it takes off, then you seek to build a movement around that initiative. So it's more organic. I mean, you may be working within a direction or a frame set by senior leadership, and that may be some form of guide for the initiative. But you're also very much seeking to work with an experimental mindset.
Okay, man, it sounds like the way to go in terms of an organization. Let's dive into. I have so many questions. That's why I'm pausing. But I want to dive into the remote workers aspect of this. How does lean change management differ when you're co-located versus when you're remote?
So my experience is easier when you're co-located.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Just because of where we're at with organizations and technology and so on. It's not to say, I mean, we've had conversations before, and I'm kind of warming to your idea that almost anything can be done remotely if you've got enough commitment and the right tech. I think, however, the reality right now is that working in this way remotely is a little tougher, but certainly not impossible. In terms of working visually and working with whiteboards and so on, it's now possible to work on online whiteboards. And in fact, I ran a webinar recently where we looked at culture hacking, which is a particular type of experimenting within companies. And we created a canvas where people posted up their suggested hacks onto this canvas, and then we voted on them. So there are ways, and I personally am experimenting with working remotely in this way. But there's no doubt at the moment it has a special set of challenges, and in some ways much harder than getting the right people in a workshop and working it through.
Right. So you're saying it's the technology that stands in the way, and then what was the other one?
So the technology stands in the way. I think there's something about the level of commitment to work. So even when people have the right tech, it's funny, isn't it? It's still even to 2018, it can still be a struggle for people to get people to turn their cameras on or to ask people to engage in a new piece of technology and persevere with it when they can't log in or it doesn't work or whatever it might be. So I think there's the tech, which in some cases I think does exist, and then there's the resistance to, ironically enough, changing how you work in order to engage and work with the tech. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it does make sense. I mean, people are still using the old spider phones on the table. And as we discussed in the interview you did with me, Skype for Business is very prevalent, and it's just a terrible tool overall. So yeah, I can imagine that tech gets in the way, especially one, when people don't have the right tech, and two, when people don't know how to use it. And then, yeah, level of commitment. I mean, people have to really want to make it happen and want to change. And that's probably a huge resistance, right? Like if you're comfortable, you don't want to change. It's when you're uncomfortable that you want to change. So
Well, when the
How?
pain, the pain of changing is less than the pain of staying the same is when you change.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So then how do you do it? What are your tips for helping people change when they're a remote team? As a lean change management facilitator, how would you do this?
Well, I mean, you'd still apply the same principles. So the first thing is to test levels of commitment. So you want to, as much as possible, work with the grain. You know, where's the energy in the organization? What are people up for? What's where's there a natural energy to harness and work with and design experiments around? So I would always start there, even with the remote team, and there's no reason why you couldn't use the right tech to do these kind of very quick. I mean, and this comes from classic change management in terms of understanding people's level of awareness, their knowledge, their commitment to a particular their skill set. You know, so there are various ways to look at it in terms of going forward with a particular change and starting there. And in fact, Jason Little, who wrote the book Lean Change Management and initially trained me in some of these ideas, when he works with teams now, he will do a very quick flash kind of commitment test with a team. And if they're not ready, he'll walk away from engagement. He'll be like, you know, I'll come back in a year, or I'll come back in 6 months. And that takes something. And that's very different from a analyze it, plan it, do it mindset, right?
So what makes a team not ready to change yet? Do you know what it is that makes them walk away? And like, how would you become ready to change? That's it.
So I think one of, I mean, I suppose it's complex and there may be many reasons, but certainly one reason, the pain of staying the same is, if the pain of staying the same is less than the pain of changing, then people will stay the same. So you've got it. So how do you deal with that? So one of the things might be to start exposing and exploring. Okay, well, where are your pain points? Where are your frustrations? Where is it potentially true that the pain of staying the same is actually higher than the pain of changing, and work with that? Or it may be that people in their minds have a view that this change is going to be very painful, whereas it may not be as painful as they think it is, in which case, how can you explore that and have people perceive or experience that change in a different way?
Is there a particular amount of time that it takes to change something? I mean, I don't have anything tangible that I can think about. I mean, I don't know what a lean change. Do you have an example of like a lean change program that you've run that has taken X amount of time?
Well, in general, way longer than people expect.
Would
be off the cuff. I mean, I work in the agile space, which lots of people are obviously initiating right now in companies. Is how do we become more agile as a company? And they're initiating programs to achieve that. And where I did that in one organization, it took us 2 to 3 years, I would say, to really start moving over to a new way of working across an entire organization. So I measure it in months and years, and of course it's unpredictable. I mean, who knows how quickly people are going to change. I mean, I think in certain contexts, it can happen much more quickly. So there's a great book, which some of the listeners may already be aware of, but Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette. And in 1 year, he goes from a particular culture in a submarine and completely flips the culture to the extent that this submarine was bottom of the fleet to top of the fleet in 1 year. But in that scenario, he got literally very contained space, right? So he's got, as a leader in that context, he has an enormous amount of influence. And obviously he had the deep skills and knowledge and commitment to work with the crew to change dozens of practices across all of the ways of working within that ship, to the extent that the sum total of those changes was this complete transformation in their performance. So it's certainly possible in certain contexts to go much more quickly, but I think in modern, large, highly interconnected organizations with very porous boundaries, it's unlikely you're going to see massive transformation, say in 1 year, like in that example.
Right. I can imagine. I mean, just getting alignment across an entire organization is already seemingly very impossible. I mean, just total alignment. It's very difficult. But then getting an entire organization to change, I mean, that's way different than just getting a team to change how they're doing things. I mean, you've got to get alignment and change across an entire organization. How do you scale it?
Right. How do you scale it? It's a great question. So I think you have to find ways to allow a message to spread. So, I mean, one of the ways of which you don't think you scale it is do a big planned scale up, right? That's one of the ways you don't scale it. I think one of the ways you can scale it is to find pockets where there is a great deal of energy and momentum around changing, and that particular team or unit is seeing great benefit, and then ask it, how can we share this? How can we share these stories? How can we communicate progress across an organization? How can we let others see what's going on here? And then the other thing I would say is the killer of change in this context is dependency. And I think that one of the things that Spotify, I know, does very well, as from what I understand it, I've never worked there, is that they really look at dependencies. So when one team is dependent on another team, they put a lot of attention on that. And how can we break dependencies is something they ask a lot. So the degree to which you can give teams autonomy gives you much greater latitude to have them change their processes and work differently. But as long as they're dependent on another team or another process or another system, it becomes much harder because they're sort of tethered in some respects to the legacy culture. So working on that basis, I think, is really important. As a first step is, how do we make this team more autonomous? Then we can think about how they might change.
Oh, interesting. So now when I'm reading or when I'm listening to this, we talked about lean being empowering the workers to change themselves and to create the change. You're trying to find the workers who are enthusiastic so that, the champions who really want to spread that enthusiasm throughout the organization. Doesn't that threaten management a bit? Like, if you're empowering the teams to make the changes themselves, do you get pushback from management? Is that an issue?
Yeah, of course. And of course, it's very threatening to those who have heavily identified with a sense of control and see control of those teams as being necessary for the success of the organization. So where they're in that place, then they see any attempt to loosen that control as potentially risking the organization and potentially risking their position. So where people are in that mindset, of course, it's very difficult. And then the way to convince, in my experience, people in those positions is to show them results. So if their mindset tells them, if we reduce the shackles, we're going to have problems, and then you find ways to reduce the shackles and see an uptick in performance or creativity or innovation or whatever it might be, and that person becomes aware of that, then over time they might change their view. And so that comes back to where we started this conversation in terms of making work visible. So how do you make work publicly visible? How do you make progress publicly visible? How do you have stories told in public is one of the questions we ask a lot in Lean Change.
Is there a downside to making work visible?
Yeah, so you invite ridicule. So
really
big public canvases up at one organization where I worked with, and we had graffiti over the canvases and abuse, and and I initiated putting this public canvas up and got a lot of heat and told Richard, we must take this down. We have to stop this doing this. And I said, no, let's leave it up. There's an important process to go through, a sort of cathartic process to have all of this pent up resentment expressed in some way. And we got through it, and eventually the graffiti stopped and people started engaging with it a little bit more with the board, and we kind of broke a dam in a sense. Felt like there was a watershed moment where, okay, now it's okay to be public. Now that's broken, now it's okay to be public. And then each activity that we then did in public subsequent to that was much easier. So we then did public show and tells, which is where we engaged with the rest of the people in that organization and showed them working progress. This is where we're at. It's half baked right now. give us your input, let's get into dialogue around it. But I don't think those events would have been anywhere near as easy had we not done the first step with making the canvas proper.
I'm so shocked that there was graffiti on the canvas. I'm completely surprised by that. So like, can you say what did they, what kind of, what they write on there?
Yeah, so there was like, I don't know if there were swear words, there might have been, but what the thrust of it was, these bloody clones, because we were consultants coming in, and so there was this sense that, here we go again with more consultants. And yeah, just clearly they'd had really negative experience in the past of change initiatives and wanted, and I suppose just saw it as, I don't know exactly how they saw it, but were perhaps very cynical and upset that we were maybe seen to be crowing about this new initiative, where their experience with initiatives like these were very bad news. So.
Right. And actually, it really shows the importance of you've got to let the steam out. When stuff is bubbling under the surface, there has to be a way for teams to express their resentment if they have it, or their anger, or their whatever it is, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So
grief. I mean, sometimes I've read about the retrospectives in Agile, which is for those familiar with an Agile, it's a particular way of working developed in software teams. And the retrospective is where you get together periodically and discuss what's gone well and what's not gone so well, as a grief ceremony, right? So I think it's important. You're absolutely right that you create these places for grief in organizations, especially when you're going through a change process.
Yeah, because otherwise, I think stuff blows in weird ways at some point. Like if there's, I know on the Happy Melly team, if there's stuff bubbling at some point, if it's not addressed, weird stuff happens, like weird explosions, weird outbursts. Somebody's not slept enough the night before, and you're just tired, and you're done with it, and you say something really rude, and off it goes. And there's sort of this weird thing that happens there.
Yeah, it's like Happy Melly's good, and so is Sad Melly, and so is Angry Melly, and it's all important. Yeah,
right. We can't all be happy, go lucky, jovial all the time. That's not really how it works, especially when you're dealing with change. So, what about some of the tools? I just want to. We're running out of time a little bit here, but I want to talk about some of the tools that you've used. You said that you've used online whiteboards.
Web whiteboard I used recently, which is super easy. There's no login. You don't have to sign up. You can just go in and start using it. It's not as sophisticated as some of the other tools, but it works.
Great.
And the stuff that, Trello I use a lot so that's comes as well from Lean in terms of visualizing the work. So having a Kanban board, which some users may be familiar with, but that's just a really simple board which has lists of to do, doing, and done, but you can make that public for a team. And if you do that on Trello, everybody, wherever they are, can engage with that. And Google Docs I use a lot. So I've created online templates for the canvases that we use. Everybody can edit those documents. That's great when you're working in a hybrid. So what I found really effective when you're working in a hybrid on-site, offline, is that you can create the canvases, say, on a whiteboard in person, transpose it into a Google Doc, and then people continue to iterate it and edit it afterwards online from anywhere. So that's another tool.
Yeah. Do you use video a lot in your work in terms of getting people to see each other?
Yeah. So Hangouts and Zoom and what we're using now.
Yeah.
Yeah. All good. If you can get people to turn the video on. Yeah.
What do you think the hesitancy is for people turning the video on?
Vanity.
They don't think they look good on video.
I think that's a big one, isn't it? Oh, yeah.
I'm so used to it now. I'm just over it. Like, I just don't, I'm over it. So, but yeah, I have a friend that I talk to twice a week on video, and he's in Arizona, and he hides himself. He cannot stand seeing himself on the video. So he'll just hide his own video and then only see me. I never do that. I never even look at myself. I'm just so used to it. So, okay. So vanity. People are.
Well, I think so. And you're right. I think it's people don't hate seeing themselves, right? And I used to have a friend who would go to the pub in England we'd go to pubs, and he couldn't be anywhere near a mirror. So if we went to a pub with a mirror, we had to find a part of the pub which didn't have mirrors because he could not stand seeing himself in the mirror. So there are people who have that complex, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So
they should get some therapy for that. Like, they can't be that. I mean, there's ugly people in the world, but nobody's that ugly. Come on. Okay. We all have our own things that we're obsessed with. Right? Okay. So what do you struggle with personally with helping teams remote? Let's keep it to the remote, if possible. So what is your biggest struggle with that? Is it the tech or the level of commitment, engaging people? What?
Yeah, I think it's getting people to commit. It's ultimately commitment, isn't it? It's commitment to a new way of working, because you can quite often get half of a group to agree to do something online, and then the other half is like, and they won't go through the pain sometimes to set the tech up. The firewall's blocking it. Oh, I couldn't get the install, or I needed to call. I mean, IT is a massive. IT departments, ironically enough, are the biggest blockers for this stuff, because they want to lock all these tools down, and I'm sure for very legitimate reasons. But even they don't seem to have the commitment often to find the workarounds that are going to keep these tools safe. And the number of times in corporate environments where you have to, I hate to admit it, but you're often having to dance around the corporate IT to set something up remotely. And I feel like there are often the corporate IT departments aren't, funnily enough, agile enough to accommodate these new tools as they come on the market. And they don't seem to come from a place of, well, how can we make this safe and secure to people and let people use it? It seems to be more of a question, well, does this meet our security requirements? And are we going to be able to put it in the next build, which might be 6 months away? So it's that can be the challenge often.
I see that a lot myself. And I understand from the perspective of the IT department, like, you have to keep things safe, like the data has to be safe, especially I work with a lot of banks. Super important, right? I want my money to be safe. I'm sure everybody else feels the same way. I don't want my personal info out there. But at the same time, like, this whole idea of having a global tool that everybody can use in the whole organization, like Skype for Business, it just doesn't work. Every team kind of needs slightly different things depending on what they're doing. This whole one tool fits all idea is not there anymore. We sort of moved away from that. And I'm sure it's a struggle for IT departments. Indeed. How do you dance around it? Do you just like break the rules a little and hope they don't catch you, or you push back? Or what's your strategy?
Well, I think you have to sort of come from first principles actually and say, well, okay, if I'm going to use a tool here, what would it be that the IT department would be really uncomfortable with us putting onto this tool? So, just a little bit of common sense, like, so we're not going to put people's salaries on this. We're not going to put often we just use first names. We're not going to put people's surnames on this. We're not going to put anything that may relate to a personnel record on here. So we're not going to put something here that's, could be, could provide competitive advantage to somebody else. What may get close to being a trade. So it's just asking common sense questions about what is the kind of data that's vulnerable, and let's just make sure we don't use any of that data. And I can understand that from an IT department's perspective, that may make them feel very uncomfortable having people making their own judgments about what's safe and what isn't. Like, I completely get that. But at the same time, if you want to move forward and change organizations and have people experiment with new tools, then you've got to find a way, right, to have these experiments and to move forward. So that's the dance I've always found myself in as a change agent, is what's the acceptable line? Always asking that question.
Yeah. Where can you squeeze it in? Where can you sort of like, okay, one team doing this who all promises no surnames and no public data. And that's true, because there has to be room for experimentation. I mean, that's part of the ethos of lean change, right? There has to be room for experimentation. And you're right, the IT departments should be a part of that dance, I would expect. And from my experience, I don't know if you see it, people find other solutions outside the IT department. Like, if you're not allowed to use Slack in your company, people go to WhatsApp. Like, they'll find the back channel. They're not going to use some clunky tool. I won't name names, but they're not going to use some clunky tool when they can just get on WhatsApp and talk to their whole team really quickly. And it doesn't meet the IT protocols, but it certainly makes a team productive.
Right. And then even as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, maybe I should push much harder when I'm working in this way with clients, is to get somebody from the security team onto the project.
It does help. I had one IT department person join a workshop that I was giving at a bank, and it really helped because they had no idea the breadth of tools that are available now. And of course, why would they? That's not their job, is to not research all the tools out there, but their eyes were open to what's available. I think a lot of people just don't know. So we're getting to the end of the time, but I want to ask a couple more questions. One is advice for people who are just starting out, advice for people who are doing a lean change management program. Where do you advise them to start? Well, one, call you, right? As a facilitator, you will help them through their change program. But what should people be thinking about before they embark on this journey?
Well, I mean, read the book. If you're interested in lean change, read the Lean Change Management book
by Jason Little.
Yeah, that he wrote. And you can find that on leanchange.org. That's an awesome place to start. And then I find I know it's almost become a little bit of a cliche, right? But find your tribe is the first step. So don't try and do it alone. If you've got some idea for an experiment and you've got some idea for some way you want to change your team or your organization, whatever it might be, start with the first experiment ought to be, will X find me my first followers? So maybe it's you host a coffee. Maybe it's you do a lunchtime session where you invite people to come discuss this idea with you. And once you can get 2, 3, 4 people with you with a passion, then work with them to try the first experiment. Because so often I see people come out of workshops that I lead and they're like, I love this, it's great. I don't know. And then you follow up with them a few months later and it's like, well, I couldn't try it, or I couldn't get permission, or I didn't find an opportunity to do what I wanted to do. And so that's definitely my advice is
find your tribe, find the other enthusiasts in the organization, because they do exist. You just have to find them. There are other people out there that want to make things better just by nature, because they're curious or they're passionate. They love what they do. They love the company. They love the vision, whatever the reason. So I like that advice. It's something that I tell organizations too. They want me to come in and train their whole organization, which is great. Would love to do it. But I always say, start with your champions, and then let the enthusiasm move out because the champions are going to be the ones who are going to, they're going to be the ones who they go over the hurdles even when it's hard because they're excited. Whereas the other people, the hurdles will stop them. So
yeah. And you might be surprised who turns up. I mean, sometimes people you put something out there public and say, hey, come meet me lunchtime for this topic, and who knows who'll show up. So sometimes it can be from anywhere in the hierarchy that might surprise you, where you might find support.
Interesting. Love it. So if people want to find out more about this, where do they go?
Well, for the Lean Change in general, go to leanchange.org, where you'll find workshops across the globe. So they happen globally. If you're interested in the workshops that I run, then you can go to firsthuman.com and you'll see our upcoming events. We're now recording this in June, and if it goes out, you might just have time to squeeze yourself on the June workshop, but we've got them running all year. Those are the 2 places, leanchange.org for lots of the material, firsthuman.com if you're interested in doing some kind of workshop in London.
So do you just do workshops in London, or will you travel? Yeah. So somebody from a warm, exotic place with, umbrella drinks invites you, are you going to go?
Yeah, Barbados comes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Anybody from the Caribbean doing lean change? Hawaii? Maybe Hawaii, not so good right now, but okay. Great. Well, thanks for your time today. I think I took a ton of notes that hopefully I'll be putting into the show notes for people. And definitely for those who are watching, take a look at the video to catch a glimpse of Richard's amazing office. I have some work to do, I think, in my office after seeing yours. And thanks for your time and for helping to explain lean change management. Yeah,
I loved it. Thanks, Lizette. And
all right.
Keep going with the podcast.
It's fun. It's fun. Yeah. So you get to meet interesting people like you. That's the best part. All right, everybody. Until next time, be powerful.
Fist bump.
Fist bump.